Hi, I'm Fred Burton here today with my good friend Scott Stewart. And Scott recently wrote a piece entitled The Chronic Jihadist Threat in Europe. Scott, this is a phenomenon that's not going away, is it?
Well, no, and I think that that's important. We've seen in the press recently that there's been, a lot of roll-up of the specific network, in Europe that was responsible for the Paris and the Brussels attack.
Like the guy in the hat.
Yeah, this Mohammed Abrini, they've identified him. He was supposed to be one of the suicide bombers, kind of got cold feet and backed out. But I think it's important that people understand that this is just one facet of a very complex terrorist threat in Europe, and taking out this one network, or kind of a network of networks, because they found people linked to them in Germany and Italy and other parts of Europe. But I think it's really important to understand that just taking these guys out doesn't solve the jihadist problem for Europe.
Pretty good bomb makers.
Their bomb-making tradecraft was fairly good. Of course, I just saw a video on CNN this morning talking about how sloppy they were with the chemicals leaking, and we had written a piece about that a couple weeks ago, spotting bomb-making activity. But that's also a complex thing. I mean, people not only need to be able to understand what bomb-making activity is, but then to have the trust in the authorities to report that stuff. It really underlies a deeper problem, that kind of distrust between, the people living in these areas and the authorities in Europe.
Do you think that the Europeans are winning this battle?
I think that maybe this part of one battle. Obviously, they have a sense of urgency about what they're doing in the wake of Brussels, and they've really focused all their efforts on rolling up this network specifically. But there are really deeper problems that need to be addressed on the law enforcement side. Because let's face it, the more we learn about this cell and the people responsible for these attacks, the more that we see their tradecraft was pretty sloppy. Their operational security was not that good.
I know. I was fascinated to watch the man in the hat with the white coat that was followed through CCTV footage all over. It was amazing to me that his operational tradecraft was so poor.
Well, I think part of that, too, is the fact that he was supposed to have been a suicide bomber. So after he took off that belt, decided not to, get married, I think that he didn't know what to do. He just kind of, freaked out. And so we definitely see that there's not that type of, planning and forethought going in, to these attackers. And that's really what's allowed them to be rolled up, their bad operational security, the contacts, the phones. So they've been able to kind of follow up the food chain as they've identified these guys, which is good. But still, it's only one facet of one problem. There are other networks out there connected to the Islamic State that are of concern. You still have Al-Qaeda running around this of concern. And then you have the grassroots jihadis that are out there. The people that are kind of inspired by Al-Qaeda or by the Islamic State, who will act independently under that leaderless resistance type model that we talk about. And that's just the jihadist realm, though. I mean, we still have the Marxist, terrorists running around in some places of Europe. We still have anarchists running around. We still have Hezbollah to worry about, and other groups. So really, there is a complex problem in Europe, and it's not going away anytime soon, no matter how successful the authorities are in Belgium and elsewhere rolling up this particular network.
I know when you look at this from a counterterrorism perspective, from our past and working these kinds of cases, it can be overwhelming when you start thinking about just the sheer volume of potential suspects and the complexity of just peeling these cases back. Do you think that the European police cooperation has gotten better?
Well, I think that recently we've seen it get better. Just the fact that we've seen so many arrests across Europe linked together to this case, that's, I think, is evidence that they are sharing information, and as they get these leads in. And like I said, I think that this has been kind of a watershed event for the Belgians. I think that after Paris, they had a little bit of focus on these guys, but obviously the Brussels attack, has lit a fire under them, and they're really showing great urgency now, trying to root these guys out. And so I do think that has kind of helped foster not only energy and resources to this problem, but also information sharing, basically across Europe.
And as we know, it's not easy managing these kinds of terrorism cases with not only the international news media, but the politicians and the bosses putting a lot of heat and pressure upon the cops to try to get the job done. And I speculate, I wonder if it's also an analytical problem, meaning the cops just don't have enough analysts to try to make sense of what's going on here.
That might be part of it, but also it's just the nature of this threat. If we look at Europe, And that's one of the things that we were writing about, when we talked about the chronic threat there. It's just the environment and where these guys come from. The fact that they can be radicalized, they don't have to travel abroad. We saw with the one Paris attacker, Kublai, he was the guy who died in the Delhi attack, and he provided the weapons to the Charlie Hebdo attackers. He never went abroad for training. He was basically a domestic criminal who was radicalized, who knew these other guys, the attackers from jail. And that really represents a different problem, and it's a different profile in Europe from what we're seeing in North America, Canada or the U.S. by and large. So, it's really more akin to what we see happening with, youth gang members in the U.S. They're disenfranchised. And a lot of the same problems for law enforcement that we have trying to penetrate these gangs. It's very hard to get as police source inside the Crips or MS-13 because these kids know each other. They grow up, they go to jail together, and that's what we're seeing in these networks in Europe. You just have these long-standing relationships, but that's also why we're seeing these cells working in Europe. Because they have the connections more so than the U.S., where we see many more lone people who are kind of radicalized then reach out for help to someone they don't know, and in many cases it's an FBI informant. So there's a little bit of different there, just kind of based on the background of who these people are in the U.S. versus who they are in Europe.
Well, that's great. It's fascinating. That's all we have time today to talk about. For those of you interested in more, please visit our website at www.stratfor.com. Thank you.